but I'm going to start by introducing myself again, even though Kay did, is that I've done archaeology since 1975, professionally since 1978. So I've been paid in archaeology since 1978. And when I went to Western, I was a pure archaeologist, but I like teaching. I love teaching. I love the classroom. I love people. I like the interaction. I like the give and take in a classroom. So I taught from 1979. So I've taught quite a few decades, from 1979 until the present, because I still take on some teaching obligations for shorter periods of time. Believe it or not, the last thing I taught was high school in Hawaii for 6 weeks because my son couldn't get out of it. And because I had the credentials, I taught high school, which was very exciting. But so how do you get from Wyoming, which I still call home? How do you get from Wyoming to the South Pacific? And I'm going to start with why this occurred. And I would ask you in this picture, where do you think this picture is? And I'd get thousands of answers maybe, but it could be New Zealand, it could be Mongolia, it could be Wyoming, it could be Montana.
That's right.
So it's varied. If you look at this, if you look at Mongolia, you look at Easter Island, you look at Wyoming, there's some similarities, but what the big similarity is wind. And it's windy here. I mean, we all know what wind is. It's one of those things that never stops, you know. And when I was in Mongolia, they used to whistle for the wind because we worked there in the summertime. And they would whistle for the wind so that the mosquitoes would go away and that it wouldn't be so hot. And when they start whistling for the wind, being a Wyoming person who's worked there so much, I says, no, stop. So I kind of want to show this, but the places that I've spent most of the time overseas have been Mongolia and the South Pacific for multiple reasons. First time I crossed the Pacific was in 1972, courtesy of Uncle Sam. And I'd never seen a ship and I'd never seen the ocean. And it was a very frightening moment and I got over it. So this is a little bit of Wyoming history, but he's an international scholar. So this William Thomas Malloy, 1917 and 1972, was a professor at the University of Wyoming. He was born in Utah. He loved the plains, and he got addicted to the South Pacific like people do. He was known for investigations into the production, transportation, and erection of the moai on Easter Island. The moai are the statues, and I'll show you those in a moment. So there'll be a little bit of vocabulary building, and I'll mispronounce them. You know, so his resting place is Tahai on Easter Island. So he's buried at this place, but he was a professor at the University of Wyoming. This fellow here on the right, if you look at the right here, is Charlie Love. He was my office mate, literally in the office right beside me at Western Wyoming College. And if you think I talk a lot, let me introduce you to Charlie. But
and you think he tells lies, Charlie tells more.
he was one of Malloy's students, and this was Charlie Love, a professor of geology and anthropology at Western Wyoming Community College. Charlie and his wife Karen Love went on sabbatical to Easter Island in 1979 to 1980, and I followed him, and he told me everything about it. Charlie followed Malloy's lead and also studied how the moai were transporting moais from the quarry to the ahus on the island. When I asked Charlie why Malloy liked Easter Island, he says, I think he likes warm winds. And I think that's why I started it this way, is because it is windy. In fact, if you've been on top of Rabbit Ears Pass or any other big mountain in North America, or even here on top of the mountains here northern Arizona, you know what wind is. There is nothing to block the wind. The Easter Island and Hawaii are the farthest two places from the continents of anywhere on the planet. There is nothing to block the wind, and they move very fast. So in 1987, Charlie commissioned the construction of a moai statue by artist Gregory Gaylor at Western Wyoming Community College campus. Then experimented with moving it. Now I was engaged with this, and what we did was we experimented with how it was going to be. You know, Charlie, being a Wyoming boy, thought they probably skied it. And the reason that they thought they skied it is they cut down all the trees. I will come back to that in just a moment, but I want to show you the Easter Island before I show you where they cut down all the trees. So they cut down all the trees, but his idea was they put the rollers in front and that they rolled it as they went along. Now, scientists and archaeologists will argue about anything. And theories and dates are all relative, and that's why people think we lie, because you get a new radiocarbon date, it changes the date. And there's always a plus or minus factor. Right now, we've got it down to 15 years, but there's a plus or minus factor when I first started of 150 to 300 years. That's a vast amount of time. It could be 600 years off of the date. So when you say something, it's not like saying that on July 4th, 1776, they signed the Declaration of Independence. That is even a little bit of a stretch because my uncle, direct genetic uncle, was one of the people at the Second Continental Congress. I know for a fact that not everybody there signed it. I know for a fact that it took days for like John Hancock to get it because they passed it around. So the signing of the Declaration of Independence, depending on if your relative signed it on which date, varies. So dates are relative is what I'm trying to come to here. You could move the moai on skis and rollers, but could you move it on the Camino de Moai, which means the road to Moai on Easter Island? Now on Easter Island, they speak Spanish. Hablo español como se gringo. Es mi español entiende, pero es difícil para mí hablar. I'll talk about that in a moment. But in this case, that statue now sits at Western Wyoming College. In fact, from Kay's office, if she parked on this side, she walked by it every day. But we moved it there and we set it on a pedestal. It weighed 9 tons. And we could move it on those skis. The issue is that it's rocky and it's rough. And so this is the 2000 WWCC crew on the Camino de Moai in Easter Island. This is the Moai, and for those of you that can't see the pointer, the Moai is to the left. So the first person that you see is standing by the head of the Moai. And you see this is all rubble. We had to remove all the grass. The term for that grass is called pasta duro, which means hard grass. It's very difficult to shovel. I brought a hoe back from there to use it at Fort Bridger because of the fact that the sod is hard to remove there too. But it's very difficult to remove and we had to get it down. If they were transporting it the way that I told you, why is there so much rock? I'm going to move ahead in the story just a little bit. In the case of no trees here, what happened? Well, the Easter Islanders arrived at about 1000 AD, and they had hitchhikers. Usually they went with, I'll reiterate this in a moment, they usually had pigs, they had dogs, they had chickens, they had geckos, which we call gecko, they're a different term, geckos, and worst of all, they had the Polynesian rat. The gecko and the Polynesian rats are hitchhikers, and they're not very big, they're like mice. And on this island, it was covered completely with Jubea palms, where they had come from in Tahiti, which I'll talk about in a moment again, where they come from in Tahiti, it was completely covered with palms, and they could not imagine in their cultural imagination a place being denuded of palm trees. And there not being palm trees grow right back up if they cut one down. Unfortunately, they did not know the ecology of this island. It takes 300 years for Jubea palm to mature, and worse, the Polynesian rats love the seeds. So pretty soon, this island was completely desiccated. It was completely denuded of trees. So they couldn't do that. When the society collapsed on the Camino de Moai, where the road is where they're standing, I'll show you a better one of this later on. But where this road was, they covered it with rock, which Charlie calls kiri-kiri. Now that's a term that Charlie used, but we put it into the archaeological lexicon because we didn't know what else to say it. But kiri-kiri, what he says is where the sheep come in and kick up the rock and it creates a rough place. What this is where they took and laid rocks on top of the road so that the Moais couldn't be transported after the society collapsed. Okay, starting with the first excavation on the Camino de Moai, our interest in cultural landscape evolved to look at the pre-1492 and the post-1492 cultural history around the Pacific Rim. If you've been around a while, you hear people refer to American history as prehistory and history. Don't let people do that to you, because First Nations could write 3,000 to 4,000 years before Europeans arrived. And the same thing with the Rapa Nui, as they are called on Easter Island. They had what they called a Rongo board, and they actually had a written system. The last person that could write Rongo was a leper. He died in a leper colony on Easter Island without perpetuating or passing on the way to write. The same thing we think about with the Incas. The Incas might have used threads. Remember, they said that they gave them those tied knots to tell them what the time was. It was more than just that. There was sentence structure, the color of the ribbon, the tie of the knots. All of it was part of a writing thing. They didn't think that the people in Central America could write, but the Mayans could write at least 2,000 years before Christ. And what happened is when the Spanish took over, they destroyed the libraries, the codexes. And we now can translate it because there was enough of it inscribed on rock. Each investigation that we conducted led us to look at who, how, and why people settled around the South Pacific and how Polynesians, Chinese, Europeans, Indians from India, Japanese, and Americans interacted and changed the environment, culture, and economy of the region. We'll look at a little bit of all of that, but we won't look at all of that together. So the purpose of this is to introduce you a little bit to Easter Island and to Polynesian archaeology, talk about what they accomplished, which is really major, then look at what happens after they leave. Because people don't just disappear, they stay in the place that they're at. My ancestors were removed by the English to Ireland, removed from Ireland to the United States by force. They burned their houses, they burned everything that they had, and they were brought to the US. And the American Revolution, don't ever let anybody trick you about this, was not about independence, is giving a bunch of Scots guns and say, shoot Englishmen. If you're, no, I have enough English in me, I can say this. It's just, that was free, didn't cost. Okay. These red spots on this map represent where we have worked with either Polynesians or with the Chinese, but these are the spots that we've worked at. And what happened is beginning in 2000, when I received my PhD, I could apply for National Science Foundation grants, and we received grants, and we were awarded with this as long as we took community college students with us to do the work, to actually do the scientific research and to teach them how to do archaeology. So our spread across the Pacific is pretty wide. And there's a good reason for that. If you look at this, in the center of this picture that you see right here, you'll see New Caledonia and Fiji. Fiji is the center of our universe because we did so much work in Fiji. So Fiji is right in the center of the map. But why I'm showing you this, as we'll come back to this, is we think that the Polynesians came from Melanesia, that I hate to call it Melanesia, but came from Papua New Guinea, came down from Taiwan and immigrated to Fiji first. Here in Fiji, they formed a culture, go backwards on this, I'll just give you a brief overview. They formed a culture that became the Polynesian culture that evolved in Samoa and Tonga. They didn't leave from this area here until 1200 AD, they reached Hawaii. 1200 AD, they reached Rapa Nui, the Polynesians, and in 1250 AD, they reached New Zealand. New Zealand was the last place outside of Antarctica settled in the world. New Zealand was the last place where humans came and settled at one point in time. And they originated from this Polynesian culture that evolved in Fiji. I'm sorry this is so text-laden, but we'll read together. When Fiji's first settlers arrived from the island of Melanesia about 3,500 years ago, they brought with them a wide range of food plants, the pig, and a style of pottery called lapidaware. I want to focus on this, that they were colonizers and farmers. They took the foods with them. They took taro, they took the plants that they were going to grow, and they grew them and were very successful. So they were colonizers, and they knew exactly what to do to colonize these islands in the South Pacific. Generally, this pottery, the lapida pottery, is associated with peoples who had well-developed skills in navigation and canoe building and were horticulturalists. Now, I'm taking this from a quote from American Britannica because I want you guys to go back and investigate this, being a teacher this long, to be able to have access to it online. So if you can go to the Britannica and look at it, that's a good point of departure. It'll take you into the more scientific articles, but this gives you a point of departure if this is not something that you've heard about. From Fiji, the lapida culture was carried to Tonga and Samoa, where the first distinctly Polynesian culture evolved. So it evolved in the Southwest Pacific, and right here is Fiji, and where you see these red dots, that's where lapida sites are, or where this type of pottery was. Now, because of the fact that you were just introduced to this, we're going to go to Singatoka on Viti Levu in Fiji, and we're going to look at some of that pottery. This is called the Singatoka Dune Field. Great contradiction. Everybody thinks Mongolia is nothing but deserts. It's got beautiful mountains and trees. Everybody thinks it's the Pacific. You've got nothing but palm trees. Well, you have sand dunes. The sand dunes actually choke out the trees. They get plenty of moisture, but this is called the dry side of the island. Every island has got a windward side and a lee side where the wind doesn't come across. The rain drop on one side of the island and less on the other side of the island. If you want perfection, move to Hawaii at a place called Kona. It rains at night. 72 when you get up, 72 when you go to bed. That's
Right?
paradise, right? It's called paradise, but it's a little bit different than that. This is not quite lapidaware, but it's close to lapidaware, and it's found in the Singatoka Dune Field because of the fact that the villages have been exposed over time. So you can actually go out here and do surveys of it and map these places. This is a pot scatter right here of lapidaware. And these right here, clays discs that they made for their necklaces. And this is a celt that they used to chop down and carve trees. They were phenomenal wood carvers. Most Polynesians are just beautiful wood carvers. There's some more pottery there in the Singatoka Dune Field. And these are the precursors of the Polynesian people. Now there's continuity. The one thing about Polynesia, there's continuity in the culture before to the culture now. They still make pottery the same way that they made pottery 3,500 years ago at this place. This young lady right here is made the base of, made the form. You can see these down here. I'll just show you this in a minute. See how these cylinders are here? She shapes it into this form here, and she does paddle and anvil. She doesn't spin it on a wheel. She paddle and anvils it to make it into the pottery that she's going to sell. This woman is taking the clay that comes from that same area that I showed you near the thing, took a dune field, and she's pugging it. Do you guys know what pugging means? Okay, because we were over the social science fine arts, we had to handle the ceramics. Pugging means you drive the air out. If you don't drive the air out of your pot, out of your clay, when you heat it up, it bursts and pops and leaves holes in it. So you've got to make sure that you pug it. So they pug it with their feet. They don't have these fancy wheels. They don't have these things to just drive the air out. They pug it with their feet. Okay, and then they prep it for spinning it into these balls right here. So you can see the pugging up here in the upper right-hand corner. You can see the cones that they make, and then they start shaping it into bowls or whatever they're going to do. This man is doing this, and as far as gender association goes with this, I've never been able to get to the bottom of it, because when I ask the questions, they speak English in Fiji, but when I ask the questions, it's kind of skirted. It's not like you need to know. Yeah, don't talk to me about that, you know.
None of your business?
None of my business.
Okay.
Yes, that's a very good way to put it. But the beautiful thing of it is they still heat it just like they always did. They start with sticks, and then they cover it. This one here, you can see it's actually inside the coconut one. That was the one we started with. Then they cover it with coconuts, and then they set it afire, and that heats it, and it creates that beautiful color on the outside of it. So there's a constant feature in Polynesian. I want to come back to that at the end of this discussion. I want to go with this right now. There's continuity. There's continuity in the culture that evolved. There's continuity in the culture today, and it's on these specific islands. This lady is showing Glade. He's an archaeologist that was with us. This is showing Glade this pot that she had just made, and it's getting ready to be fired. It hasn't been fired just yet. Okay. So now we're going to get into the grist of it and get us to the Marquesas or the Society Islands or Tahiti. Most of you will know this is Tahiti. It has multiple names, but from the Marquesas, it looks like they went to Hawaii, and it looks like from the Marquesas, they went to Rapa Nui or Pitcairn. We did not know where these people moved, but they were going back and forth across the ocean until the trees were cut down on Easter Island. They would sail back to the Pitcairns or they sail back to Tahiti, and they actually had genetic mix. The genetics are really good for us because we can now tell which direction information flowed. But you can't pin them down to what island. The genetics from the mouse or the rat, they're a mouse, but from the Polynesian rat, the genetics from the chickens can help us triangulate back to which island they originally came from. So where the colonizers came from can be traced through the genetics in the area by triangulation. Rat, chicken, humans, it helps. Okay, so Tahiti was established in about 1000 AD. The Polynesian culture evolved here, and I'm going to use architecture to define this. In Hawaii in 1200, Easter Island 1200, New Zealand about 1300 AD. Notice the dates. It's not that I'm contradicting or telling you two different stories. It's just the plus or minus factor. It's just which archaeologists you're going to find something from. In the Americas, there used to be an argument that people had been here for 10,000 years. It's 14,000. It's gone back even further than that to the 20,000. About we're people don't want to accept a 20,000-year-old date, so that's people are arguing that deeply. So what you know about science is it's a sliding scale, and once we find out that we're wrong, we have to move on. Briefly, we will use architecture as one example of the sophistication of Polynesian societies. We will note references to the structures across the Pacific so you can find them online as a beginning point for further research, as I've already mentioned, of the nature of these structures. Okay, so Tahitian architecture. On Tahiti, they developed these moray. Okay, in New Zealand, Moray, Cook Islands, Moray, Malay, Tongan, May, Marquesian, or Malay and Samoan. Now, you don't need to know all those things, but the reason I say that is that these are ceremonial spaces. They're sacred places that serve the religious and social purpose in Polynesian societies, and they're basically on every island where the Polynesians spread. So they have different names in these different places, and I provided those names so that you could know that they were called different things. So if somebody said that they've seen a moray, you know what they are. This is a moray on Tahiti. Most of these photographs we took, this is off of, I took this photograph in Tahiti, I shot it at a park, but this next one is from, it's on Wikipedia Commons, but this one is a better picture of that same marae that you see above. They're a platform with rocks around it, they worship their ancestors here and several other things. According to Solomon, marais are portals between the Po and the reference sections, which I don't want you to memorize, but there's Solomon's. The Marae are portals between Po, the world of the gods, and darkness, and Ao, the everyday world of people and light, so that people communicate with their ancestors. So they're a place for communication with the ancestors. Ancestors are there. On Easter Island, they're a place for mana. So the big statues contain the mana, or the power, the spirit of the ancestors. So mana is power. But they were very important to worship and venerate the ancestors. In Hawaiian architecture, they have heiaus. The heiaus, and that's the formal spelling, but heiaus were built in different architectural styles depending upon their purpose. But you see how this is grand architecture. This is grand architecture. These are monumental architecture on these islands in the Pacific Ocean. Depending upon their purpose and location, they range from simple earth terraces to elaborate constructed stone platforms. There are heiau to treat the sick, offer first fruits, offer first catch, the first fish you catch. I think it's called ahi. They eat like crazy in Hawaii, and I just found out that's tuna. And I told my grandson needs a surfer. Why don't you just say tuna so your grandpa can get this? But the first catch is the first fish that you catch. You venerate it. Start rain, stop rain, increase the population, ensure the health of the nation, achieve success in distant voyaging, reach peace, and achieve success in war. Now, this is a very different type of heiau, but it's still called a heiau for success in war. These were warring people. They fought over land and territory. There were wars throughout time. This is the Hikau Heiau, and this is just an artistic rendition off of the plaque at this particular place. This is Yukola Heiau, and this is more for the kings to be at in northern part of Kona. But you can see how elaborate the architecture is and how they stack the stone. And just like at Flagstaff, everything is igneous, and so it's very difficult to work. On Easter Island, the Rapa Nui architecture was completely different. We'll stop with this. Now, this guy, if you see his name on the bottom, we contracted him. He's a famous photographer. We wrote 3 books together, picture books together. And Val took his photographs. He was under subcontract for the grant that we had. So we have fair use on this, but he gave us permission. And most of these are my pictures. And so if I don't have a name on it, I took these pictures. This is Ahu Tatangaria. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Tatangarika. There was a female archaeologist named Kathleen Rutledge who came at the turn of the century, who discovered most of these things that National Geographic says, oh, we just discovered this. We archaeologists just learned this. Actually, Kathleen Rutledge knew this at the turn of the century, and she was one of the first people to document this. This was upright, and a tsunami pushed them all over. The Japanese funded setting these back up in place. So these have been replaced back up on top. They had to be craned up because like this one right here in the center right would be like the one at Western Wyoming Community College, would be 9 tons. So how did they move it? Well, that's where we started the discussion. How could you move a 9-ton item if you don't have horses? You have dogs and chickens. So I don't think they have dogs on these surrounding tips, but you don't have anything to move them by. The word ahu has 2 meanings in Easter Island culture. First, an ahu is the flat mound or stone pedestal upon which the moai stands. Second, the word ahu also signifies a sacred ceremonial site where several moai stand. I got this from Google, and I'm going to tell you why I say this, because when students used to turn in stuff from Wiki, I'd turn it back. Say, you gotta go get this from the book. But the reason I pick it from Google uses AI to condense it down into 2 sentences. So the AI makes it comprehensible. I'm sorry, but gotta go with the times, things change. Okay, New Zealand architecture, they had the same kind of fortifications, but they called them paws. Now, the people that we worked with on New Zealand, we started working in New Zealand in 2002, and we worked there more than any other place outside of Hawaii. Fiji, we've worked 10 years, Easter Island 5 years, on and on it goes. But the word paw is pronunciation spelled paw in English, which drives me crazy. Can refer to any Maori village or defense settlement, but often refers to hill forts, fortified settlements with palisades and terraces, and also fortified villages. Paw sites occur mainly in North Island of New Zealand, north of Lake Taupo, and there are 5,000. Taupo is in the middle of the North Island. There are 5,000 of these, and we actually did excavations on one of them. This is the One Tree Hill in Auckland, the one that you just saw. That's One Tree Hill. These things have palisades around them and they have fortifications. This is Korpapa, and the students from Western Wyoming College actually excavated on this one side at that Korpapa. Okay, so this is a ditch. You're looking to the east this way, you're looking to the west this way. This is a ditch, and you can't enter across this ditch unless you're a ratu, a chief, a person in charge. And they were very much, they're very powerful chiefs. The chiefs were extremely powerful. And they controlled the food, and they were built in fortified positions because there was constant warfare on these islands. Polynesians were and are superior agriculturalists, architects, artists, builders, engineers, navigators, and stoneworkers. And this returns us to the Coconino de Moai. Okay, so now we're going to look at this. This is where they carved those statues. This is the quarry location. This is where they carved the statues, this big mountain in the center. And down where these people are standing, the tourists come by the hundreds every year to this place. They brought them down. Now, there's some good things about this, but up on top of here, they have these huge holes where they put these stumps from the trees, and they used them to lower them down. They carved them face up. You'll see some in a minute that aren't face up. Going with the story, but they carved them with them face up, and they cut a keel under the bottom, and then they put a rope around them and slid them out. Let the gravity from the quarry carry them downhill. Easter Island, because of lack of trees, everything was carved in stone. On New Zealand, where I just left right there, everything was carved in wood because there was abundance of wood, and they never did exhaust all of the trees, and they had just a phenomenal forest on Easter Island. But everything on this island was carved from trees, and I really don't have time for this digression, but I'm gonna give it to you. You can buy a little moai carved from here when you leave Easter Island, and you take and you purchase them, and you purchase all other kind of rock artifacts. They charge you by weight when you leave the island. So just keep that in mind. Limit the amount. Okay, so this is one of them that's carved on his back. It's not Helgante, but this is one of them that's carved on his back inside the quarry. This right here is from several different sources, but the road, this is Poike. This is up here is where the quarry is at. Right here is where the ahus are at, where you see these statues at this point, right through here. This is the airport, but the road, and I don't know if you can see this, I don't know if you can see this if you're looking at it from your Zoom, but it runs from Poike straight across to Vaihu. Okay, so the Coconino de Moai runs across it. It had berms on it. It was built up. It was made so that you could actually transport these items from here elsewhere. Now you also had roads around the other side, the north side, the pointing to the north. It's the hardest place to get your moai to. It takes a lot of work. There was one number that was given to it. A friend of mine did his doctoral dissertation on the number, but they keep finding more and more of them, so I'm not going to tell you, but it was great. He had it at 365 and he was doing his doctoral dissertation. There's more than that, and they carved it. This is the one that we worked on in 2000. And this is where I learned Spanish because I had an entirely Spanish-speaking crew. They speak Spanish on Easter Island. They're Rapa Nuis, they're Polynesians, but they speak Spanish, and I had to learn how to speak Spanish to run the crew. This is where those rocks are that are called kirikiri. They clogged the road up. We mapped each one of those rocks. We mapped that moai there too. Notice where do you see that the moai is? Where is it broken? The neck. Yeah. So the theory that Charlie had is not too far off, is that they fell over and broke their neck. Now, not everybody buys this. This is Charlie's theory. Not everybody buys this, and I'll show you a contradictory theory in just a moment. But the reason that they put this way is that they said that they walked to the ahu. That each one of these things walked from the quarry to the ahu. Now, there was more elaborate carving on this. So the things that you see in National Geographic where they says, hey, they had carvings on the back. Yeah, we always knew this. But they don't do the final carving in a lot of cases until they get it to the ahu, and there they carve it, and then they put eyes in it. Eyes are very interesting in ancient statuary. People used to say that the Greeks didn't have eyes in there because they couldn't make them perfectly. No, they painted them. In this case, what they did was they put coral for the whites, and they put obsidian in the center. for the eye. So they would place the eyes on them once they were in place so that they could see things. These possess power. These have mind. These possess the power of the ancestors. So when it fell, its nick broke. Now, this is kind of complicated. Okay, this is Charlie Love in 2001 in the upper left-hand corner of it. This is the area that we excavated to try to determine if the road was like this, but it's bermed on each side. I'll give you a better example. But it's got kiri in it. But however, remember I told you about the post holes at the quarry? They had post holes. This is a hill that has to go on either side of the hill so that you could pry or pull that up. So you were assisted by tugging. One of the things that we found is that they made rope out of what? They don't have trees. They can't use it out of bark. So they used it out of grass and they wove the grass. There was no hemp. Now, this used to be a funny joke because hemp was, an active ingredient in marijuana, right? So, but not really. But the hemp is real important, and hemp was all over the world, but you have to have hemp for rope to stretch. So when they tugged on it, no matter how good they made the ropes would break and over would fall the statues and their necks would break. This statue down here, see the white truck, you can see the moai there. This was the area that I was assigned to excavate. It goes right in front. On the left, you can see a statue over here, goes right in front of an ahu. And up on the top of it, where this man is standing there taking notes, was a sacrificial place. We think that they took the ahus across the plazas of some of the village and that they celebrated passing through the villages when there was more cooperation on Easter Island. So this one here has less rock on it. And we think that this rock in the center was actually placed there. So when we did the excavation there, we put a deep trench in the upper part that went down 6 feet. And again, I'm going to tell you a story. So I was down in the hole 6 feet down in the ground, down deep, pulling this stuff out, handing it to my student. And I says, Tom, I marked him out. I said, Tom, take this bucket, man. I said, I'm holding my hands up. I said, I got to take this bucket. He says, no, man, no, there's whales going by. So Tom, take this bucket. So he took the bucket and he says, but Dudley, how often are you going to be working in your grid and watching whales go by? He's right. So we got out and watched whales for a while, but that's how close. Now, this picture is towards the ahu that I was talking to you about, where they have the statue. That's a curb. That is a curb. I speculate, and not from speculation from excavation, that it was smooth across there when they were using the road. I don't think it had the rock in there. Some people have theorized that they set the poles like I showed you on the skis, and they used the rocks to roll. They pulled it with the rope like I was telling you, and they used the rocks to roll. So the rock served as a brief rolling way of doing it, but there wasn't enough rounding on it. The ahu themselves have a lot of scarring from where they fell over. This, the uphill side, where they had the post holes, and this guy is standing by one of the post holes here. Now, one of my friends by the name of Terry Hunt in Lipo, they taught at the University of Hawaii. I think, I can't remember, Lipo teaches now. Terry Hunt moved to Oregon. Thought that this was the way to do it, that you rocked it because they said it walked. One thing that we do note is on the bottom of this, you see the very bottom, how that's up in the air like this? There are chips on each one of those moais that we've seen, and they could be from either way. But if they were rocking and rolling like this, it would explain some of the chips on the base of the statue. Now, those are smoothed out and carved out, but you can still see the chip line where they had, because it would splinter and drive up a vertical, slab off the top of it. Just looking at this, what do you think would be the problem with this method of moving that? What do you see as a problem with this? Where would the greatest stress, where might the weak point be in this process? Huh?
The neck.
Yes, the neck, and also where might be the point, where it might be another point where it might be difficult.
Did you say the ropes break?
The ropes break, and I think that strap around the top of it. Now they've got this woven, so they've woven it with mats. The Fijians are phenomenal mat makers, and they make mats from grass. So they take and they strip, they've got a little spike on the ones that they use. They take and they strip it, and I've seen them make these beautiful matted houses. They actually weave instead of putting up paneling or plywood, they actually have these woven mats for the exterior of their house. And that kind of climate, it doesn't matter because you want to keep it cool or hot, whichever way. And doesn't need it hot because it's pretty much warm all the time. But I think that's a woven mat. That could cause a problem, but they're so good at weaving that weave might hold. And I thought for a while, well, maybe that's leather, or maybe that's whelk skin or something else, but I think it's a woven mat on the top. I think at the eye point would be a point that might be weak, because even though you've got good ropes around it, I think it might break. However, they showed that this would work. They did move the statue by rocking it back and forth and making it look like it was walking. I think our way is more efficient, but that's because I'm a homer, and whatever they do at Western Wyoming College is okay. Okay, one narrative holds that the building ahus to hold moais ended, following a major societal collapse and the emergence of the birdman culture about 1540 years. The island collapsed. Too many people. It depends on who you want to believe, how many different people were there, but it's 12 by 12 mile island. There's a rule in archaeology that you carry the heaviest thing the least farthest. If they'd had a land bridge to Chile, they'd be lined all the way to Chile. I'm kind of joking. But in 1540, the system completely broke down. And by 1700, there was one sailor that went through, they pushed over the last statue. Why they pushed over the last statue was to kill the power of the ancestor of the people that settled that ground. So when they were defeated, they killed the spirit of the power of that person there. But long after the Rapa Nui stopped building ahus, they continued to build with stone, and that's where I kind of want to take this in the next phase. This is Ahu Tatinga, and it's the ahu that I spent the most time working on. And you can see where the statues have been pushed over by this. After the ahus were abandoned, they were very beautiful. They're like Tongariki. They had nice, beautiful platforms. They had rock art around the bases of them. They're just beautiful, beautiful pieces. They started covering them with rubble. So that thing about kiri is there, but they, instead of destroying it, they would just cover it up with rock, and then they started cremating most of the dead. So in working in a lot of these places, the one thing you've got to be careful of, if you get a mixture of scoria, which is red, and you get a mixture of coral, and then you get a mixture of white bone, you've got probably a burial there. So you've got to take very heavy precautions not to disturb it. But this is Ahu Tatinga that sits along the ocean. And I want to look at the reuse of stone. I don't want to end the story of the moais came down, the people left, they never left. The disease wiped them out. Some of them were stolen for slaves. They were called blackbirding. People would sail up there in their ships. They'd take them off the island and put them to work all around the Pacific. They were stolen as slaves. But what I want to look at is what happened to those rocks that were used on the roads, and what happened to those rocks in the ahus. This is a sheep fence. And only a Wyoming kid or a person that works in Mongolia would go to Easter Island instead of sheep. There's actually more to it. What it did was it changed the cultural landscape. The building of these walls divided this in a different area than what was divided along the tribal lines from the Ahu back. Technically, you controlled from the sea up the hill. And that's the same thing in Hawaii, the same thing in Fiji. You control from the sea upwards so that you have a diversity of resources available to you. You have wood in the mountains, you have fish at the sea. Now that kind of subdivided. My friend that's a Ratu Jone from Fiji, the Fijian Museum, he was a hill country person. They would make negotiations. If you became solely in the hills, you would trade goods down to the sea. Fish up, wood down. Fish up, wood down. But in this case, what you did was control from the sea up the hill, and you build these fences. This is Ahu Tatinga, and you can see it right here. This has got pieces in the lower bottom part of Moai, but this is Ahu Tongatiki. Now, I want to give you a little bit of the political before I go to what we're getting to here. Felipe Gonzalo de Ajedo, and I mispronounced that, annexed Easter Island in 1770 on behalf of King Charles III of Spain. So it was annexed by Spain. On September the 9th, 1888, the Agreement of Wills, Acuerdo de Voluntados, I'm sorry, my Spanish is better than what I'm saying right now, was signed. Now the wills is a poor translation to volunteer. We voluntarily agree. So remember, in Spanish, it goes backwards. We voluntarily agree in this accord to give this particular land to Chile. Chile now owns Easter Island. 1/3 of the people are Rapa Nui, 1/3 are Misti or mix of Rapa Nui and Chilean, 1/3 are Chilean. It might be diminishing at this point in time.
Wait, go back,
Huh?
go back,
Yes.
talk about their hats.
Oh, the hats on the top?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me stop and talk about the hats. Those are hard, by the way. These are made out of scoria. The top hats there are red. So there's a place where the scoria is. Scoria is where the volcano burns the earth. So there was earth on this place. It burns earth and it makes it into the scoria. You carve the red hat and you put it on top of it. Now, I noticed the long ears, they had long ears and short ears. There are two different types. The eyes were the coral pieces that are right there. Those are hard to get up there. There was big discussion on how you hoisted them on top. First off, the moais were set in place first. Then the top hats were built up with a scaffold and they lifted it up with a scaffold and set them on top. So this is one of the few places on the island that still has top hats. We're not sure that all of them had top hats, but they had top hats on at least some of them. And by the way, good question, Kate, because this is an inland Ahu, so it's not on the coast. So this is an inland, on an inland Ahu. And I don't know if that makes a difference if you have the top hats or not. Good question.
Classier on the inland.
Yeah. So this is what happens. Is the place is deprived pretty much of trees and you live in grass houses. These grass houses are not simple though. They have stone foundations around. So these are elaborate houses. But what happens is the Europeans and the Chileans take over all the land. And these fences that I just showed you, you see how it comes to a T, changes the cultural landscape. You have overgrazing, you have all kinds of problems. And when I was there in 2003, I was talking to a guy from Australia and I says, why are you here? You know, why am I there? But he said because he was studying sheep herding on New Zealand, because what they did was they practiced Australian sheep herding styles. They burn the grass to reseed. So by burning the grass, it recedes and starts again. There's plenty of rain there, but they burn the grass. What this does is it creates a whole different manifestation, and trees just can't take root. I have friends that work with me in Mongolia, and I asked them, what is the climax community? And this guy's from Colombia. I said, what's the climax community? Is it trees or is it grass? He says grass, because grass grows out and spreads out its roots so far that it kills off the ability for trees to grow and to get settled in there. Now, if you look at the pine trees down in, they're all Douglas, what are the pine trees? Douglas,
Where in
Flagstaff, ponderosas.
Flagstaff?
Yeah, the ponderosas put down those needles, and if you watch those needles, they're so acidic, it kills all of anything around it, and grass doesn't grow under those trees. So there's a coevolution between the grasslands and the tree lands, and what he says is that grass is the climax. When they cut down the trees and they plant this grass in here, it's very hard to get a tree to grow back in here, but it can be done, but you have to cultivate it. They now have banana trees and all kinds of things here. But this burning and this building of these stone walls created a different type of land use pattern on the island, and one that still continues to this day. This is a historical photograph of Ahu Tatinga, and I want you to note the nature of the moais, the one on top and the one on the bottom that's fallen over. I want you to take a quick look at this. This is Ahu Tatinga when I went there and took a black and white photograph to show that they hadn't changed that much. Then I want to know about this fence. That fence has since been removed because I talked to the locals and I said, guys, if you put this fence across here, it's like taking and killing the spirit of the Ahu. So they've taken that down. That fence has come down. So it's taken, huh?
Because Dudley said so.
Well, not just me, but I mean, it's a good meeting. What happens is I put the idea there and they says, good idea or bad idea. It's an outsider's idea, so it can't be that good, but maybe it's a good idea. Well, I tell you why. I'll show you in just a second. It was established a little bit in science. Okay, one of our goals was to look at how the cultural landscape evolved on Easter Island. So these two individuals, they were some of our informants that we had on the island. Now, this doesn't, I got another picture in a moment. This doesn't look too simple, but if you look at the red ones in here, and this is 1 meter by 1 meter. We did a profile. We've analyzed this whole area here. This is from Poro. This is where it's been washed on the sea. These are used inside of the platforms because they're barefooted and they walk there when they're in front of the Ahu. And if they walk on the round rocks that have been rubbed in the ocean, they're walking on smooth floor. These right here are structural pieces. The ones with the holes in them are structural pieces. The red ones here. These are structural pieces that were carved to make the houses that they set the grass house on top of. So like they call them priest houses on that island, but they're more than just the priest house. So this is from the Pirca. This is a wall. That's Spanish. Pirca from inland that they built there for Ahu Tatinga. And this is the priest house just beside it. And these are the priest house posts that have been pulled up. This one is in the point of disrepair. So the one in the left is disrepair. They begin pulling it apart and they begin putting it in the wall. They built it inside of the wall and they redid the wall, but it's just human nature. Remember that one rule that I said archaeologists have that's worth anything? You carry the heaviest thing the least farthest. In the course of a day, that's water. So but you carry the heaviest thing least farthest. If they can take it from one of these things and put it inside the wall, they're working for a living. They're just going to do what they're going to do. Now that's changed, but that's the priest house. In front of that priest house, to the left, is that area where it's got the smooth rock. The same thing as the Ahu had in its plaza in the front, the smooth walk that you could walk on. So the rounded rock inside of this, the ones that are black in the lower right-hand corner, those are rounded rock that have been washed in the ocean that are part of the floor. This again is a picture of where you've got one of those rocks in there that was from the priest house, put in with rock that's just from the field rock. These are the rocks that are, again, that are there. This is the priest house rock. Okay, so we did actually do some science. This is a matal. This is a matal that was found in the cracks. This is a weapon. They made their weapons from obsidian. In fact, everything is made from rock, like I told you. So they had basalt, they had obsidian, they had the rock that they made the moais out of. This was used for fighting. This is the top part of it is what we call the hafted. Hafting is when you take and you put, we'll make this into the spear point. Take and you put it in front of here, you wrap it with twine, you wrap it with fish gut, you wrap it with whatever you want to do. And then that becomes the way of cutting. That top part is the thing that you use for killing. It's been broken, it's been using. Now that's not just humans, that's for everything. This is a cross section of this, but that's stashed inside this wall. Now, inside of Ahu Tutinga, you find something else is going on. The recycling of rock is common. This bottom rock in lower left center looks like just a rock, right? It looks like it's got a little rock art. That is a moai's head. That's a head of a moai. His face is to the inside, but this was a moai head. So when they killed the spirit of the previous moai, they incorporated it into the Ahu. What I'm showing you here is like I showed you with the pottery, there is continuity over time with use and reuse and how you use specific things. The rocks are sacred. And this is one of the things that really got me about this place. I was sitting there and talking about them. They're pretty funny. We'd always eat lunch together. And some of it was in Spanish. Well, all of it was in Spanish. So some of this is lost in translation. But the one thing that they told me is the record of the whole world is contained in rock. It's silicate in nature. And he says, what do you make your silicone chips from? But from silicone. So you have the history of the universe contained in these rocks. Do not dismiss them. So I says, why did you use the old with the new then? And they says, because we want the knowledge of the old to match with the knowledge of the new, but that's that one person's story. So that doesn't mean that that's tradition. This right here is the moai that's down, and the top of this is where the quarry is. There are a lot that are down. So I'm going to give a chance for questions, and I want to thank these individuals. And I put Kate pretty high up there. Kate and Rusty. But I want to thank these individuals. And these are the sources cited. Look them up. When you go to look at, if you want to look them up, you can look these up. And these are the references that we used here. And this is a sunset. Now, that's one thing that got me too, is the yellow sunsets. And I thought, oh, Easter Island's got the only place I've ever seen these kind of yellow sunsets. Must be something to do with the ocean. Nah, same thing in Hawaii. So, okay, I've talked real fast, covered a lot of ground, so I'm going to leave it open for questions at this time. Any questions that you have, I'll gladly answer. And if I don't know the answer, I'll say, I'll get it for you later.
Hey Dudley, this is Rusty. I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence of humans being present during any volcanic eruptions, or is it all older volcanic stuff?
The Easter Island's really old. There are volcanic eruptions on Hawaii, and they're present there all the time. That's why Pele is so important of a god. And so in Hawaii, they have constant eruptions. And my kids, my daughter was born in Rock Springs, Wyoming. My son was born in Denver, and they all live on Hawaii. And they go up and they film these things. You get used to it. You say, oh, yeah, let's go see this. What else are you going to do? I mean, it's entertainment, but you can't get close to it. In Hawaii, for example, they have those channels. Now, you have to know what you're doing. You can't be a person that's not lived there because you got to know what you're doing. They'll take hot dogs and roast them.
Wow.
Do not do this on your own. This is not recommended. But yeah, there are people that have lived on these islands when they were erupting. Pompeii is a very different thing because it spewed ash and stuff like that. And they actually tell you that in Hawaii. They say It's different than Pompeii. When we have our volcanoes, it's not like Pompeii, but yes, they do have active volcanoes, not at Easter Island. That's an older island. It's like Kauai, and the island, Hawaiian island changed. Did that
Also-
answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Also just wondering about the climate, like the amount of rainfall on Easter Island.
55 inches a year, I believe. They get hail and they call it grifo, and it comes from so high up in the environment. Literally, it comes down not in round balls, but in like spears. It comes down like they're like yeah, they're like they come down like they're pokey. They call it grifo, but yeah, they do have 55 inches of moisture there. On some places, you can get up to between 80 and 100 inches of moisture in some places like Fiji, or where you have high cyclonic action. Cyclones are a big problem on all the islands. There'd still be hurricanes north of the equator, but the cyclones south of the equator, they're pretty bad, and they can have major dumps, flooding. That house that where you saw me showing the where they're making the clay pots. The year before, that place had flooded, and it flooded all the way up to the eave of the house. So it had actually gone there, and they showed us the flood line where the mud had been inside of the house, and they don't have any place else to go. They just cleaned it out and moved back in there. So the potters there, the ceramicists. We did do a lot of oral interviews, but limited language makes sure we don't know what some of the answers were, but we did do a lot of oral interviews. Do you guys have questions? Yes.
So just a timeline of deforestation in terms of like.
We think by 1600, by 1560, by 1500, they deforested, and they had eaten everything that they brought with them except for chickens. And this is pretty interesting. A moai is probably it's close to being a chicken. Okay, so they have these fortifications for chickens. So they built these chicken coops that are fortified, and they'd actually put watches on there because there was a deprivation of a certain amount of protein. So you could still fish, but the problem with Easter Island is it didn't have reef building coral. And without reef building coral like you have in Tahiti, where they came from, you've got a problem because you don't have as many fish around the edge of the island, and a lot of luck falls in with that. So you have multiple problems there, but did I answer your question?
People that live there, you had the elite and the latest force. How was that hierarchy?
It was usually hereditary. Now, the one that I'm most familiar with is in Fiji, because my friend is a Ratu. And he was in the hill country, and he was over the Fijian Museum. We brought him over to the States and had him over here and even to Western Wyoming College, and we had him give lectures. I mean, we're really tight. So when you're born into a Ratu family, chief's family, then your sons go down to the hereditary. So the oldest, youngest, et cetera, like that. The youngest son might have to be a laborer. And so that's kind of what it was. But the people that were born into the lower strata, it was kind of like caste-like. You were the workers, you were the laborers, but you were given a specific thing that you did within inside of your society. Like if you were the canoe builders, or if you were the ones that cut the wood, or if you were the ones that planted the taro, or whatever your specific thing was, there was a position for you. It's not idyllic, but it was pretty much a caste system. I was in Fiji in 2006 when they had the coup, when they kicked the Ratus out. They used to have like the House of Lords within their parliamentary system, and then the ones that were elected. The Ratus have been stripped of their power within inside of Fiji. So that Ratu system was dissolved, but it's so deeply embedded with inside a tradition that they still listen to their elders, which makes me think that there was some benefit to it. However, tribes warred with each other between each other. But yes, there were people that was a stratified system.
And the same type of on Rap Nui or Easter Island when the trees left and the resources were going away, then I'm sure they had the same type of conflicts.
Major wars. So the bird cult, which I didn't go into, developed about 1560 AD, about that time in that area. And they were constantly fighting. It became like the Greeks. The Greeks developed the Olympics so that they'd have that calm period. So they'd have a competition, and Kevin Costner, I think that's his name. Kevin Costner did Waterworld or something like that, where they showed that competition where they'd swim out and get that frigate egg and swim back. And the first person did was the chief for the whole island for a year. Is the Birdman for a year. But during that time that they're preparing for that Birdman competition, 2 months, whatever it amounted to, there was no war. There was no time to fight war. There was peace there. So it was so rife with conflict, but they had to develop a mechanism for periods of peace that were there. And the bird cult was while they were in training to swim to ETPT where the frigate birds' eggs were, and swim it back is when things were calm. And so that was constant warfare. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, and I got into that, because there was an old movie called Rapa Nui
Yeah.
that followed a lot of your presentation. You know,
Yeah.
with the building and stuff, and then the cutting of the trees and
Yeah.
stuff, even the getting the bird eggs and stuff like that.
It was pretty, because we worked in it, where the Birdman cult is, they have these like monasteries there that you go in and you train because it's hard to swim between there. The currents are bad. So they trained constantly. You had to climb the cliff down, you had to swim across, climb the cliff up, get the egg and get it back in one piece. The smart money was to let somebody go up there and get that egg and steal it from him. I'm not joking. Not joking. So no rules, you know. Well, some rules. You had to, some rules. You had to get there. And then they carved your figure on there, so we know that it lasted for 300 some years. So you became an anthropomorph. You were both human with human traits and bird traits. Always the bill, the frigate bird bill was there as part of it, but the Birdman's was carved in the rock there, so we know that it lasted for over 360 years. You could look that up. I might be wrong on the precise number of years, but it was pretty fascinating, actually.
Anybody?
Rapa Nui.
Yeah.
You showed, like a Hawaiian petroglyph that
Yes.
mentioned that they had systems of record keeping.
Yes.
What are some examples of? because
I would say on the Hawaiian one, because I get myself in trouble if I go too far down choo-choo track on this, I'd say the petroglyphs are records of it. So for example, when a person was born down on a volcano, they have a place where they would put the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord was there, so there was kind of like a record keeping up that way of verse. And so you knew how many people were born in that particular area. But that's one way. That's just, it's a mnemonic. It's not like expressing things across. But petroglyphs are always a way of communicating through symbols, and people argue this, but they're a way of communicating.